What purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
I have amendment number 30 at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Posey of Florida. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following. Section 416. None of the funds made available by this act may be used by the Department of Transportation to authorize exempt facility bonds to finance passenger rail projects which do not use vehicles that are reasonably expected to be capable of attaining a maximum speed in excess of 150 miles per hour between scheduled stops as defined in Section 142 of Title 26 United States Code.
Pursuant to House Resolution 287, the gentleman from Florida and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Exempt facility bonds are special tax-exempt financing instruments designed to help raise funds for important infrastructure projects like airports, waste management facilities, highways, and other transportation needs. In fact, our current law, 26 U.S.C. 142, clearly lists 15 specific categories of projects that can receive financing through the use of exempt facility bonds. One area, the law restricts the ability of the Department of Transportation to authorize exempt facility bonds, is to finance passenger rail, which it limits to high-speed rail that can reasonably obtain the speed of 150 miles per hour between stops. Yet the Department of Transportation has decided to ignore the law and authorize bonds for projects that clearly do not qualify. Whatever views members have on passenger rail, my amendment would simply ensure that the Department of Transportation follows the law in authorizing the use of tax-exempt bonds, and I urge my colleagues to support this common-sense amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. Does someone rise in opposition? Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, I claim the time in opposition.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All of Florida received a private activity bond allocation to issue these bonds. You know, there's no provision in this particular section of U.S. Code that requires a passenger rail project to achieve 150 miles an hour. This amendment would prevent DOT from taking any potential further steps on this very, very important project. If for some reason, let's say the project needed a small extension, DOT could not process it. Now, the passenger rail line that would link Miami to Orlando would be, frankly, is an important project to the state of Florida, and one that I fully support, Mr. Chairman. And we have to remember that it's being done by the private sector. So I don't think that we should be looking at creating any unnecessary restrictions, any barriers or uncertainty for this project as it moves forward. It is a project, potentially, I think the first of its kind in the country, where you have the private sector assuming most, if not almost all of the risk. You have the private sector who's going to be involved in it. The numbers can't be made up, cooked, or anything, because it's the private sector who's doing this and who ultimately will be held accountable by their shareholders. So with that, I respectfully ask for a no vote on this amendment, and I would yield back the remaining part of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With all due respect, there's nothing in this amendment that adds any restrictive impediments whatsoever. It only requires that that the Department of Transportation follow the law when they allocate these funds. Although this has been called a private project, the taxpayers will be on the hook for over $1.7 billion. That's $1.7 billion. So I think it's important, in the interest of protecting our taxpayers, certainly that we make sure the Department of Transportation follows the law. If there wasn't a propensity already demonstrated not to follow the law, I would not have to bother with this amendment. But it's clear there are some intentions to violate the provisions of the law and do things that they're not authorized to do. And so that's why I urge my colleagues to support this common sense amendment to bring accountability and protect taxpayers for $1.7 billion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.